Hi Marina,
Oh,
how you going?
yeah, I can see you, but I can hear you well.
Ah, didn't turn my video on. It's coming. Why can't I turn my video on? There we
Here
go.
you are. Hello.
Hi,
Hi, now I can see you.
let me change my name. Good. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. I'm glad to see you and thank you for your time because it's
My pleasure.
precious. Thank you.
My pleasure. I'll just go grab my cup of coffee. It's all ready. I'll just grab it. How have you been since Cuba? Yeah, I just spilled water everywhere.
Oh, so
Really?
so so many things are going on. Yeah. Yeah, but it's wonderful. You know, I conducted the same interview on the experience of living in Cuba with Kartika, and it was precious. So she shared so beautiful stories about her experience and how she contacted people and how people were open and supported her despite of all these difficulties that which they have themselves. They supported her every time. So
Yeah,
absolutely wonderful.
that's nice to hear. I mean, that's the impression I got being over there a week and half of that sick.
Yeah. So what were your sort of most important maybe takeaways from our visit?
Um, that Cuba has a lot to offer the world. I really, it's something that struck me so much. I mean, at a time where we really need to develop resilience and work out, how to be strong and deal with difficulties and they've been doing it 68 years and still have a smile on their face, still doing the rumba on a Sunday morning, and it's just really impressive. I thought it was amazing. Um, I'd like to know more about the agroecology. I think there's a real opportunity there to play for me to play a role. It's not a little role anyway, and do something to help tell the story of what they're doing there and get that across some knowledge barriers. Mm,
Mhm.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
no, really impressed. I can't wait to get back.
yeah, that's absolutely beautiful. So how would you maybe see you can link this to your Australian heritage and your history of uh, being there? So were you born in Australia? So are you the native there? Yeah.
Yeah, so I was born in Sydney.
Mm-hmm.
And I lived there until I was 21, and then I went to about the furthest place in Australia you can go from Sydney, to a town called Broome, and that'll be the focus of what I talk to you about
Huh.
for this purpose. But in terms of how do I connect it with Australia, it's really through the work that I do, because a lot of the work I do is now in adapting to climate change. It's in developing the arguments for climate justice and loss and damage funding. I'm working with countries like Vanuatu, Timor-Leste, Nepal, Senegal, a whole bunch of countries that are really challenged by these sorts of things, and Cuba is too, but it's having to do it not entirely on its own, but it's certainly got constraints as to, what it can import and export and all that sort of stuff. So it has some challenges. But places like in the Pacific, um, for different reasons, they have some similar problems from what I can sense. I mean, I've only been to Cuba briefly, and I'll go to the Pacific first time in a few weeks' time to Vanuatu, doing some work with the government there. And but they have, Cuba doesn't have machinery in its agriculture because it can't import it. The costs of fertilizer is really high, so they turn to natural fertilizers. Well, in the Pacific, the costs of importing machinery are prohibitive. So they have rudimentary type agriculture largely. The costs of fertilizer are extraordinary. They have to find ways around that. So for different reasons, they have to get to the same place.
Mm. Hmm. So it's mostly economics than politics, but the outcome is the same, more or less.
Yeah, yeah. In terms of the constraints that they have and the impacts on climate change and all these sorts of things, I think there's a lot of similarities there, and they're isolated. Just thousands of kilometers between individual countries in the Pacific. It's an extraordinarily large place,
Hmm.
and so whilst there's a Pacific community, they also have to be quite self-reliant and work things out. So. That's, a big part of what they're trying to do is build their resilience to the challenges they have and what's coming in climate change. In Vanuatu, I think it was 2023, something like that, on top of the COVID and everything else, they got hit by two cyclones almost in a row, and just one of those cyclones created fi financial impact of 156% of the nation's gross domestic product. One incident. And they just get hit by tsunamis and cyclones and droughts and earthquakes and just one after the other for them. But yet they're still bouncing back. Right? I don't think Australia would bounce back from 156% loss in GDP in 1 year. Yeah, but I don't know much about these countries, so just ideas.
That's incredibly interesting because being here from the European perspective, it's something at the edge of the world, and you even don't know what's going on there. So even Australia feels like something exotic because you are sort of we are mostly predominantly focused on European countries and maybe for some reasons US and Canada. But these remote parts of the world, people live there and they somehow deal with the problems and they do something. And again, this research which we launched is mostly focused on what can be learned from people and places which are not so explicit. So we don't hear about these people and their problems and these places very often. But at the same time, there is the wisdom, there is the maybe unique approaches to some problems which we all face.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And
So
we've been, really bad at learning from that experience in Australia. We've been terrible, in the things I'm involved in, but more generally, how do you live in a country like Australia, floods and droughts and white people have been there for 250 years. The indigenous people have been there for 60,000 years and they were thriving, you know. So they learned how to live there. But then we came along and did a lot of damage in 250 years.
yeah. That's interesting, because I had the conversation with one of my colleagues from China. So she's originally Russian, but she has been living in China for the last 20 years. And she mentioned to me this. So she was reading a book wrote by some of the descendants of the Australian natives. And it was very interesting about this approach to the land, to live in, to nature, to be in this connection, and their wisdom, which sometimes, not sometimes, mostly and very often, was perceived by their white invaders and colonialists like that this was sort of obsolete and traditional and very archaic. So they had lots of wisdom which could be learned by the European, by the Western cultures from this. So in this perspective, I also was looking forward to ask your opinion and experience, especially in this situation that you can compare. You now live in Europe and you belong to this Western culture. You understand how it works here, but at the same time you have this absolutely wonderful experience of being raised in Australia, and maybe you somehow contacted or maybe thought and heard about these indigenous cultures as well. So
yeah, it's really, I was reflecting on that, reading through the questions before, because I got to understand there's quite an emphasis on Indigenous cultural issues in these questions. And just when you're talking then, I'm thinking, well, there's actually been three big component parts of my life. The first bit up until 21, um, I only saw two Aboriginal people. One I went to school with, so was a fellow student, and one was some distant relation of the family that we used to go and visit occasionally. We used to visit a family, and they had an Australian Aboriginal person in their family. Now, what I now understand is she was part of the stolen generation. Didn't know it at the time, didn't understand any of that at the time. And that is because growing up in Sydney, and I grew up in probably the least diverse part of Sydney in the Sutherland Shire. They call it the Insular Peninsula. It still is quite, very dominated by Caucasians. And it was, you just didn't bump into Indigenous people then. And you didn't bump into that many Asian people then either, or other nationalities, a few more sort of European, Italians and Greeks, but largely it was sort of English heritage, English, Irish, Scottish heritage in that area. So it was really a bit isolated from all of that. And then there's another part, which is the focus I want to talk to you about, is the time and the influence of living in the far northwest of Australia, which is absolutely completely different context. Small town, 2,500 people, of which half were Indigenous, on the edge of a region called the Kimberley, which is the size of the UK, and sparsely populated wilderness that is dominated by Indigenous communities and a few towns, but largely remote Aboriginal communities, some of them very, very small. And it's completely different. Suddenly I'm playing sports against the Indigenous people and that sort of thing. And it was, a real eye-opener. And not all of it easy. Some of it was pretty challenging because back then there was still not an enforced isolation, but in practice quite isolated lifestyles, right? We would drink in different bars, for example, most of the time. Sometimes we drink together, but we had Indigenous people on our football team, so we had mixed Indigenous and white Australians on the football team, or cricket teams or whatever, but didn't really have all that much close contact. And of course, there was a time of year when I was more focused on playing sports and partying at a time of life. It was in my 20s. So I wasn't really connected to the cultural side of the Indigenous community there. So that was a shame. I look back at that now and I think, wow, what a missed opportunity to really understand. But I didn't grow into that need to understand those things until later in life. And then the third part is, well, there's some other places in Australia I live, and now I've been in Europe for like 10, 15 years, and it's a bit more back like Sydney living. It's you know, disconnected with that Indigenous knowledge that exists particularly in the Kimberley in Australia. Other places as well, across the north, particularly of Australia, Indigenous people are far more prevalent.
Mm.
And they have really strong and deep connections to country still. And that's really impressive. Really impressive understanding of their environment, and connection, and see themselves as being part of it. Whereas, we're getting better in the sort of the Western culture, if you like, of seeing that we need to work with nature, not try and fight against it. But we still largely, I think, see ourselves as a little bit apart from nature, and we're above that. We're really, the world will do fine when we're all gone. It'll do just fine. It'll go back to what it wants to be.
Yeah, we mostly we sort of used to accustomed to use the nature mostly as a resource, even if we
Yeah,
want to sort of for the mental health, for healing, for the rest, but it's mostly the resource in comparison to maybe being it, feeling ourselves as a part of it. So be
absolutely.
in the extension of ourselves, of our bodies.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, look at half the careers that I've been involved in. It's called water resource management or natural resource management or fisheries management. And it's all about exploiting the resource. Not all, but that's where it started. It's moved more towards ecosystem-based management, but it's still largely to get benefit from.
It's still
The-
management, not co-living. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, what would you say, maybe what you recall to be the most mm, um, bright experience, or maybe difference between your experience of living in Sydney, which is mostly sort of European white predominantly culture, and Kimberley? So maybe could you recall some, what would you say that would be different in this part of Australia with this diverse population, including Indigenous people, even if you didn't sort of went deeper into their culture or something?
Um, yeah, well, I know more now, of course, and I think I need to tell you the background story. Let me tell you the story of how all this happened, all right? And I'll tell you a story in several parts. It'll take 5 minutes.
No worries.
It'll
That's
give
great.
an opportunity to then branch off into other things, all right? So when I was a kid, I was a very keen fisherman, right, in Sydney. And I had a good mate. We used to go fishing all the time. Used to even buy fishing magazines, and we'd read fishing magazines. And I saw this story in a magazine of this place called Broome. And it'd be worth you just throwing up a map of Australia, and you can see where Broome is. Sydney is on the southeast and Broome is the northwest.
Mhm.
And Broome is like the southern gateway to the region called the Kimberley.
Mhm.
And it's called the Kimberley because it looks a lot like Kimberley in South Africa.
Mhm.
Similar landscape. So if you have a look at a map and have a look at a few pictures of Broome and the Kimberley, you'll get an understanding of the context there. All right. Anyway, so I I read this fishing magazine. I remember distinctly, one of the questions was, do you remember a moment? Right?
Mhm.
Yes, I do. 15. We're going fishing the next morning at 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm reading the fishing magazine the night before. This is before we found girls, of course. And so, so we're reading a fishing magazine, and it has a story about this amazing fishing in Broome. And at that time, Broome is like the far end of the earth in Australia. It's the complete opposite corner to Sydney. And I said to him, I'm going there. I'm going to go there and I'm going fishing there. I was 15. Right? I finished school 3 years later, and the first job I started was to train as a radio officer, ship to shore communications, Morse code, all that sort of stuff, organizing search and rescues and things. And I trained. The reason why I took that career was because they had a radio station in Broome, and I wanted to get to that radio station, right?
Oh.
So I started that training at about 18. Yeah, 18, just not long after school. And 2 days after my 21st birthday, I packed my car and I drove towards Broome because I got the position in the radio station as a temporary transfer to relieve people while they went on leave, right? So I got this job. So I drove down, and remember, like, I've been traveling a little bit with parents and a few trips myself with mates along the New South Wales coast or Queensland surfing and fishing. But this is something else. This is, 5,000 kilometers away on the opposite side of the country. So I packed my car, drove off into the wilderness down to where you can catch a train across Australia. So I had like 4 days drive to get to there, then on the train for 3 days, and then a drive up the West Australian coast for 5 days. It's 2,000 kilometers just up the coast. So the whole trip took about 3 weeks to get there with, surfboard on the roof, fishing rods, everything, everything I owned. And I drove into to town on the last day and I just saw this sign, Broome, like this, Broome, Broome. No welcome to Broome, population this, no big signs, just Broome. It was like, you made
You
it.
wanted it.
You made it. Congratulations. And it's the most beautiful place, most incredibly beautiful place. And at that time, there was only 2,500 people lived there. To get there up that road on the west coast, there were hundreds of kilometers of dirt road, and you had to take extra fuel in a can to make sure you got to the next petrol station, which were like sometimes 500 kilometers apart. So you drive for hours and hours and hours without seeing anybody else. It was just extraordinary. Now there's cars going everywhere, but back this is in the early 80s. So it was really wilderness and by yourself, driving by myself. I had no air conditioning those days, of course. A little old four-wheel drive that could only go 90 kilometers an hour. No air conditioning, no radio, and by myself, and 40-degree heat. So to keep myself awake, I spent the time calculating how many miles per gallon in those days I could get. I was getting like to as many decimal places as I could do it,
Mhm.
just to keep myself awake. Anyway, so I get there and then had the most wonderful 8 years of my life. Just wonderful. Just like a party that didn't stop for 8 years. It was just brilliant. And then I met who is now my ex-wife, and we went to other places because we sort of had enough by then. I was changing. I needed to get a better career going, and I wanted to get into fisheries management. And so I went to Tasmania and I studied there. Anyway, that all happens. Um, and for 10 years, I couldn't read a story about Broome or look at a picture about it because it just hurt too much not to be there. For 10 years, it got in my blood so much that I just felt like my soul was there, and it really hurt to be away from it. And eventually I got into jobs where I went back there with fisheries management and went back there with water management and more into the Kimberley in other places and got to see those. Um, and then and then I sort of put it out of my mind a fair bit. And then um, my son took a job in one of the Kimberley towns, not in Broome where I was, but the nearest one, which is 250 kilometers away. And there's 2,000, 3,000 people live there. He was living there as a school psychologist. And this region has the highest rate of youth suicide, Indigenous youth suicide, which is horrific. But he was dealing with that,
Mhm.
only a few years ago. And so when COVID finished and I could finally get back into Australia, I went to visit him up there in Derby. And the moment I set foot in that region again, I just felt at home. I felt at peace, and I was so happy to go back and see him. Then now at the age I was, living almost in the same place, but way more connected to the Indigenous community and what was going on. And you see there, I'll see if I can show it to you without unplugging everything. See there behind me there is a
Mhm.
piece of the local Indigenous art.
Hmm.
These are called what are these called? Waginas? Waginas? They look like space people, right?
Yes.
And this is Indigenous art, one of the kinds of Indigenous art that's found all over the Kimberley region. These people have been there for something like 50, 60,000 years. It's the oldest living culture in the world. It's extraordinary. And once, my son, I got this from a local art gallery because he'd become very well connected with the gallery owners, but also with the artists and so. So I was really just so incredibly happy to be back into this region and feeling so well, being there and seeing my son living so well there and being so connected with what was going on. And then I came back to Portugal, and I think 6 months after that, I was diagnosed with cancer, and and yeah, I had a cancer, and so I had to start treatment here in Portugal, and it's heavy, it's really heavy. I'm quite claustrophobic, and it was a tongue cancer, so I had to get like a mask made that sat all over my face and left my eyes and little space to breathe.
Mhm.
So you put this on, and then you get clipped into a bed and then taken into the radiation machine, and you're laying there while it goes around and zaps you. And it's incredibly claustrophobic. It's awful. And I was in such a panic that I had to find a way to deal with this because I was just, on the edge of screaming and panicking, and I had 32 of these sessions of radiation to come every day, 5 days a week for 6.5 weeks. And I, I did three things. One was I stayed conscious of what was happening. So I worked out, well, there's 13 of these zapping stations and they last for 12 seconds or whatever it was each. And so I was always counting. The doctors were saying, "You're counting, are you?" I said, "Yeah, I'm counting how many we've done and how many seconds we've done of each. And then I know, okay, I've done 10% of the treatment today. I've done 35%. I've done 51%. I'm almost done." And that got me through. And the other thing was there's a lot of little birds here, and I pictured these little birds in this tree that was on the roof, that they were watching over me. That's the second one. But the third one that's pertinent to this story is that over the course of those 32 treatments, I replayed the travel from leaving Sydney on my 21st birthday to the very moment I arrived in Broome, we saw that big sign. So over 32 sessions, I laid there, and it's like 10 minutes each session. So each day I replayed, where did I go on this day? What part of the road? Where did I stay? In some places I could remember what I ate for dinner that night. And this is in what are we 2023, and I was remembering what I'd eaten for dinner in 1983 on this travel. And so I just kept timing it so that on the last session I would reach that sign, Broome. And and um and 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 so sometimes I had to slow down and sometimes I had to speed up so I could get there on with that plan of getting there on the last session. But just going through this journey took me back to, going to Broome. That first journey was the sort of the awakening for me to get out from where you grow up, leave the parents and the friends and everybody behind, and you're going out into the world, to this big open world with basically what's in the car and a job to get at the other end. And replaying that was like going through that freedom, that opening of the world again for me. It was just beautiful. And so I was by sort of halfway through these 32 sessions, I was looking forward to going because I wouldn't let myself think of any step, any next day until I got into this harness and I used that time that way. So it was so um, rich for me to be able to draw on that first visit to get through this really difficult process. Yeah.
Absolutely fantastic. So it's healing through the freedom, through this in living of this experience.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes. Because this was the most claustrophobic position I'd ever been involved in. And as I said, I really am quite claustrophobic, but the trip and going to the Kimberley, Broome initially, and then all these other regions up there, the question you asked at the beginning was, what's in essence, how do you describe in essence the place in one word or two? And for me, it's freedom and growth. That's what it was all about going there, and that's what the region is like. It's not a place of growth in terms of physical development, buildings and all that sort of stuff. It's a place where you can grow personally and enrich yourself and, understand your place in a very big world a little bit better.
that's beautiful. And by the way, so first of all, you have encountered of this idea of Broome at 15 when you was 15. So what was your first experience? So was it as you when you came physically there? So was it the same that you that you imagined when you were 15, or maybe was it better? Was it so? How was it?
It was amazing because the only thing, there was no internet back then, of course. So the only thing I knew about Broome was a little story I found in a in a dictionary, not a dictionary, an encyclopedia, and one small photo this big. That's all I knew. And so I drove into this town, and there's still, the main street of town was still a dirt road. And you drive down around, and it's if you've seen any of those photos, it's the most beautiful place you can see. The color of the water is incredibly blue. The sand is red, and there's mangroves all along the coastline. The tides are up to almost 10 meters. So massive high tides that at that time still came into the town during during the biggest tides, and there's an outdoor picture theatre that's still there, that still operates. It's over 100 years old. And you used to have to put your feet up off the floor at the high tide because the water would come into the picture theatre. And so it was really uh it was really old school, growing up in Sydney, which, was 80s, so it was a fair while ago now. It wasn't that sophisticated, the city then. And um but it was quite organized, and this was to a place with, just dirt streets and people walking all over the streets, and just just sort of, it felt unregulated, freedom, um, you know, opportunity to do things you couldn't do elsewhere. Like, I had a little boat and I'd just go out by myself, catch big crabs to eat for dinner and all that sort of stuff. It was just,
Well, sounds like a paradise,
it was paradise. But when I was with my son, back in 2022, we stayed there, and I said, "Oh, come on, I'll shout you and your girlfriend a night. We'll go and stay in a really nice hotel in Broome that we used to frequent back in the day." And I had a terrible weekend. It was Easter, which is really silly time to go there because it's the peak of tourist
Mm,
time. And so going when I first went there was 2,500 people and no tourism. And now there's about 20,000 people live there. And during the peak of tourism, there's about 80,000 people in town. So it's changed a lot. And I didn't recognize, I didn't know where I was driving around the streets. I don't know where I am anymore. There's only just a little bit of the old town that looked familiar, and a lot of stuff had changed, and not for the better. Which is why I sort of got to appreciate where he was living, Derby, and more, because it was more sort of old school. It was
mm.
more like the Kimberley was when I first got there.
Yeah,
In
I
fact,
see.
the population hadn't increased. There were no more buildings, I don't think, from over, or very few new buildings in Derby, um, over 40 years. Really hadn't changed. Yeah. And that's nice, it's nice to find the occasional place that hasn't changed.
Mhm. What was the difference between the relationships of people in such a big city as Sydney and in such a small place as Broome, and again this cultural diversity, I think, as well.
Yeah. So at the time when I was there, so I was in my 20s, 20 to
Mhm.
20, 21 to 28 or something, 29. Um, it was all about sports. It was all about sports and social events. And so there was, and the Indigenous people in Australia, it's a generalization, but they're really good sports people. Great at football, great at cricket, great at just about anything they put their mind to. Very natural athletes. A lot of them, not all of them, obviously, um, but very, very talented. And uh, you see many of them playing in elite sports in Australia now.
Mm,
And so it was all that was the connectivity really with the Indigenous people, was in the sports, a little bit socially, but not so much, which is a shame. But that's the way it was back then. Um, since I've been going back there for work for over the decades, in fisheries management and then water management, um, got to deal a little bit more with Aboriginal people, and increasingly trying to incorporate their understanding into the way natural resources are managed. It was only really at the beginning of days of that when I was still working sort of with the state government, but there was certainly attempts to start to try and incorporate at least their views, um, into the way things were being managed. It's gone a fair way since. There's an organisation up there now. There's a river called the Fitzroy River that runs out near Derby. where my son was living. And it's one of the most natural large river systems in the world. And the other key word for the Kimberley is wilderness, because I said it's the size of the UK. I don't know how many people live there, but it'd be in tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands. Um, and and vastly populated. And it's not all, there's quite a lot of wilderness areas that are in a almost natural state, particularly, islands and things off the coast. Fair bit of the land has been turned into pastoral country, for cattle grazing over
Mm,
100 years or so, but it's low intensity cattle grazing. And so, and the Aboriginal people also to tend have been very good stock stockmen, stock persons, I suppose you call it. They're good at riding the horses and good at managing properties and so.
mm,
Um, so which is I mean, you still have they still some of them still have very, very strong connections with the land, still go, for long trips overland, still take a lot of sustenance from the country. So they have a really strong connection. And one of the things that's happened in more recent years is maybe a bit more self-organization. Like for example, I'm just trying to find the name of it again. There's an organisation called the Martawarra Fitzroy River Council. So it's a entirely Indigenous-led organisation that's trying to protect that river system from development, basically, because there's proposals fairly regularly to, set up irrigation systems or whatever, and some of them propose to take water from the river, some of them propose to take groundwater, but either way, these groundwater and the rivers are connected, and they're certainly connected physically, and they're connected in terms of spirituality of the Indigenous people as well. So they're fighting to retain it in the way it is, and they do impressive work, really impressive.
oh, that would be interesting, maybe to have an opportunity to contact them and to learn more about their heritage and their understanding of this work. So,
Yes. Yeah, last time I was in Broome, I was going to have a meeting with the chair of the Martawarra Fitzroy River Council, but she got COVID the day before I got there, so it didn't happen, which was a shame. But no, they're very, very active, and they're making headroads. It's still early days in proper incorporation of Indigenous rights into water management in Australia, but it's progressing.
that's great. So, speaking about the cultural relationships and intersection, am I correct to understand that those indigenous people, they also so they have the same schools with the go to the same schools with the sort of white population, and they all speak mostly English. So how does this? So do they preserve their own language, for example, or do they mostly sort of westernized, if I can say so? So how is it working?
Yeah, I think I'm not too close to this, but the impression I get is that in particularly in recent years, there's been more of an effort and more support to retain the language groups, because the language is so connected with the culture,
Mhm.
and that's the storytelling is a critical part of the Indigenous culture, right? So they talk about the dream time, for an example, right? So all these stories, many stories go back to the dream time, essentially how the earth was formed, and that hill is called something or other because it's seen as that was when the emu got turned into rock, or I don't know, I'm making that up, but those sorts of stories, right? And so there's been a real effort. I think there's been a lot more effort on the Indigenous people's part, but also on others to support it, to retain language as part of culture. There's also much greater awareness of the Indigenous art. Yeah, when I was there, I, we knew there was some Indigenous art in some of the locations, but I was disconnected from it, unfortunately.
Mhm.
Now it's everywhere, and there's awareness that it's there, and there's, tours and things you can go and see the Indigenous art. So that's another side of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and you mentioned that your son is working with the indigenous children as well now.
Yeah, he's moved on now, but he was up there for 5 years in Derby. He was a school psychologist.
Hmm.
So he was dealing with a lot of these at-risk kids. There's a lot of suicide in the area. Um, yeah, a lot of social issues in the area that they're grappling with. There's health issues, alcoholism, drug abuse, all sorts of things
Mm.
that you get in all societies, but it's certainly causing issues in the communities, some of the communities in that region.
Yeah. So was the school mixed? So it's so all children were uh,
Yes,
in it. Yeah.
yes. So it's mixed. I think I'm not sure. I think some of the remote communities probably have self-schooling. Yeah,
Mm.
they would have self-schooling. They're too remote, right? They wouldn't, not all of them would make it into a town for school.
Hmm.
Some of them surely have self-schooling. Um, there used to be School of the Air in this region. I'm not sure if they still have that, but this was basically a school over the radio that the students used to listen into to classes.
Well,
That's
that's
how remote it was. Mm. Um, yeah, no, Joel used to. My son used to do a lot of trips flying and driving into these remote communities to do assessment of kids at risk and things like that.
so. Why is it so? Because of the lack of the social sort of opportunities, or so why this high rate of addictions and suicides just within the indigenous community? Has he told you about it? So what's the main reason? Why is it so?
I'm no expert, but what I pick up is things like loss of loss of connection, um, like loss of connection to culture, um, um, worries about the future, unemployment. I don't know how high unemployment is in that region, but um, you know, you're talking very small towns in some of these places. So there's not like the services. There's not the opportunities for careers that you get in the big cities, right? So the question is, do young people move away from these regions and go to live in a city where they're completely disconnected from their country,
Mhm.
or or do they stay where there's not so many opportunities? Um, so there's those sorts of things. There's a lot of um, poor nutrition.
Mm.
Um, um, you know, even the remoteness causes problems in the sense of even fresh fruit and vegetables. You're 2,500, 3,000 kilometers from Perth, about the same from Darwin. There are some growing areas around Broome There's good agriculture around Broome now, but most of these are, commercial productions that some of the produce gets sent to Perth and then gets flown back up to these remote communities and towns, or comes back on a truck. And if you have a flood event, there's only one road, so if you have a flood event, nothing gets in and out for sometimes weeks. There was a big flood event a couple of years ago that completely cut off several of the towns for months and months and months. So it's not, and everything's very expensive because it's so far to send anything to there. Yeah, everything's very expensive.
Yeah. So I'm just yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, I think my impression is that the sort of disconnection with culture, but not a strong connection with something else, has been particularly hard on the young people.
Yeah. I just recollecting that you mentioned in the very beginning that those indigenous peoples, they have been living there for thousands of years, and at the same time we see that, and they were thriving, and now this sort of diluted indigenous culture and sort of lots of Western culture, and at the same time lots of problems which nobody knows how to deal with them in terms of this remotedness and being cut off their civilization in terms of production and technological things.
Yes. Well, you think back, only 250 years ago, what was life in Australia for Indigenous people? It wasn't about having a job, making money, building houses, having careers. It was an Indigenous life of surviving and thriving in the natural system, trade between community groups, connection between tribes and community groups. But it wasn't, as far as I know, there wasn't large scale sort of civilization. We must build, we must, it wasn't that. So it's such a different expectation of life to what existed 300 years ago, that they are now caught up in or expected to be part of. And if they're not playing that game, there's a tendency to look at them as, well, what are they offering? Which is very strange, given that they were here for 60,000 years and doing quite well.
Yeah.
But we had a referendum last year in Australia, or a couple of years ago, and the aim of the question on the referendum was whether or not to recognise a voice for Indigenous people in the Constitution, and that was defeated. There was some lack of clarity amongst the Indigenous people, some saying it's not a good thing, most saying it was, and that might have muddied the waters a bit. But the net result was that the majority of Australians voted against giving a voice to Indigenous people in the Constitution. Many are arguing, oh, they're just the same as us. Why do they want to be just the same as us? Why do they have a special voice? Well, they have a special voice because they're not being treated the same as everybody else. They don't have the same standard of living. They have a 20-year less life expectancy. All of these things that have to be addressed if we really want equity. But I'm not sure that result showed that we really want equity. But now politically it's off the agenda. So not sure where it goes now. So there was a bit of depression about the impact of that.
Speaking about the the soul of this place. So this specific vibes you were speaking about, this freedom, and again, maybe it was connected because you were young and it was the best sort of period of life of the person. Yes, and our 20s is the most beautiful, I think, part of our lives, no matter where we spend them. But at the same time, so what was your again, you can compare it with the place where your son was living and working, and you returned, and you mentioned that many things have changed because of this growing of this city and overflow of people, of tourists. So at the same time, what would you say was the unique vibe of this land, of this, maybe not even Broome or Derby, maybe the whole area. So what's the uniqueness in it from your perspective?
It's the naturalness and the sense of wilderness. Um, you go into this region and it feels like a land at peace.
Mm-hmm.
You know, can be a really hot day and there's absolute silence. Not a word. It feels wrong to talk. So you just sit there. My son and I were fishing on a riverbank and we just sat there for hours and hours. We didn't talk. We didn't need to talk. There's a few birds every now and then, and it's just this silence. And I haven't experienced that silence like that. It's not like there's not people talking. It's the landscape is quiet. And then at dusk, it comes alive with all the birds and everything else. But in the middle of the day, it's just absolute silence. It's extraordinary. And so, you know, this whole region, you know, it's the size of the UK. I only got to see little bits of it, and he saw more than I did. In 5 years he was there. I was there for 8 or something. He saw more in 5 years than I did. But it's it's the naturalness, the sparse population, the fact that, you know, you can drive for hours and you don't see anybody or any sign of people being there. I remember one time a mate of mine went camping and I went camping into this place called Bell Gorge, which is quite popular now. But in the 80s, it was hard to find and hard to get to. And we pulled up and we finally worked out we got to the right place because carved into a tree was a sign of like a picture of a bell. So, yep, okay, that must be Bell Gorge. And I was walking along a dry riverbed because it was the dry season. And there's no sign that anyone had ever been there. But I looked back and I saw my own footprints. And I felt sad because I'd just left footprints where there was no sign before. And I was hoping for the next flood event before the next person came so he would see it like I saw it, or she. It's 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 you know, really remarkable country. There's a few more visitors there now, but you know, I was there 3 years ago and we still went to all these places where it felt like it did 40 years ago. It just felt so natural, so sort of wilderness, um, and still that sense of freedom. Mm.
Mm-hmm. Just to clarify, what it can give a person this? So you know, you was speaking about the steps, and I was thinking that it's maybe felt like you are at another planet than so this first astronaut on the moon surface, when you absolutely that you are the first human here. So this understanding of being the first human in this place. So what would this experience and this wilderness and this freedom, what it could give a person? So what it helps us maybe to understand what could be learned from this experience? What do you think?
For me, I think it's always very humbling to be in a situation like that, you realize you're reminded rather that um, that you're such a small part of the whole picture. It doesn't matter how important you think you are. You really you really don't matter much. Um, and so, do good, but don't stress too much. You're a small cog in a big wheel.
And what can it help? So what would you how to say it? What would you maybe advise people to think of through this experience, through this understanding of being such a small but very uh, incorporated part of the whole, not just a
Yes.
separate thing.
Yeah, yeah. Like I think it's that opportunity to just sort of reflect on your place in the world. Um, that doesn't you realize it's such a big world and you're a small thing in it. But um, I think the other main lesson is about working with nature. Um, that you know that you can see when you're in that sort of situation, you can understand a little better that connectivity that the indigenous people see in everything. That it's not it's not them and it's not water and fish and trees and soil. It's all part of the whole nature, the whole picture, including them. And for me, that's what we've really lacked in the stuff I'm involved in, natural resource management and our climate policy is still not properly getting that sort of understanding that we're just part of the sphere and everything in this sphere is connected. And I've been harping on this for about 20 years now, that one of our big mistakes has been to try and reduce the complexity of things, try and break down things into chunks so that
Mm.
we can manage that chunk and feel like we're on top of things and we're getting, doing it well. That's the wrong way to go. What we need to do is develop our understanding of the complexity and accept the complexity, accept all these connections or these interlinks, even if we don't understand them, accept that they're there and work towards both understanding and supporting the maintenance of those connections. So rather than manage a fish stock, we need to make sure that the water's flowing, the water's of good quality, there's an appropriate level of runoff from the land into the water, that there's no dams that are stopping the fish migrating upstream, that there's some natural pools where kingfishers are able to hunt for fish, all these things, and there's water for people to drink and there's water for other animals and whatever. So it takes it's all about multidisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity. It's all about making sure that we get all these different ideas on the table and reducing the dominance of individual
Mm.
people or disciplines or whatever. We've had the age of engineers. We've just been going through the age of economists. Okay, they've had their dominance, but bye-bye. We need, you know, a more constructive mix of ideas.
So what would be the next stage? What do you think? after the age of engineers and economists.
Might be the age when we sit down and actually listen to Indigenous people about how to manage how to be part of a world that is sustainable.
Mm. The age of curious listeners.
The age of?
Curious listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Because, ego, there's a great band I used to love called Skyhooks, and they sung a song, Ego is Not a Dirty Word. It was a good song, but I don't really agree with it. I think ego is one of the biggest constraints to improved um, outcomes for environment and society because individuals, disciplines, they're all trying to be the ones to provide the solutions because that's where the rewards are. You're the one with the answer, you get rewarded. If you publish more papers, you get rewarded. It doesn't matter who comes up with the answer. But it's ego that makes us all want to be the ones with the answers.
Yeah, it's mostly again speaking about this being the first human in some place. It's mostly uh, feeling ourselves as humble guests rather than managers of.
Yes, yes, and being in a vastness like that helps you be humble. I need to go back there again soon.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. I personally have so much thoughts to think on this rethinking of our place on the planet, first of all. So again, speaking about our research is about rethinking and reimagining the role of the citizen, and that it's not only about the city. Yes, it's mostly about the role of the uh, human being who inhabits some place, and what is our role again? What are we expecting to receive? But again, what we are going to create, what we are going to bring, how we are going to steward what we have, how we are going to take care of this place where we live. This is, I think, the very similar idea of what we have discussed today, that we definitely need to somehow reimagine, rethink our role.
I think it comes back to a lot comes back to either disconnection or connection. I remember when I was living in Perth, I was told that one generation ago, before I was there, one generation before, so 20 years or so, um, something like 90% of people that lived in Perth, their family owned a farm or they had friends that they'd go and stay on a farm. And so there was a strong connection between the city and rural life.
Mm-hmm.
There was, they understood where the food come from, the animal, the beef or the pork or the wheat, or there was but within one generation, that disappeared. And the people in the city had no idea anymore where their food came from. And I met a woman once who we went to get some seafood to cook dinner, and she wanted to get some calamari, and we looked in the fish shop, and I saw, oh, there's some nice squid,
Mm-hmm.
and I said, there you go, they look good. She said, no, no, I want calamari. She thought the calamari was these little white rings, right? Didn't know where they came from, which was from the squid.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for me, we need to rebuild that connection with the natural system. And
Mm-hmm.
when you rebuild that connection, you automatically become more maternal or paternal towards it.
Mm-hmm. And appreciative maybe to what we have.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then it's about little things, okay, people say, well, you shouldn't interfere with nature, and you see a native animal on a hot day hasn't got any water. You shouldn't interfere with nature. Well, no, that's bullshit. Of course you should. We've created an environment that is causing so many problems for the natural system that any little thing we can do to push it back a bit the other way is got to be a good thing. So yes, you should. If you've got a little hedgehog that's suffering in the heat, give it some water. Why not?
Yeah, I think it's because this, again, setting the difference, the distance between the human being and the hedgehog. You would help the human being who is starving or who is sort of experiencing some problems. Why wouldn't you help the hedgehog or maybe a deer or maybe some other animal if you don't see the difference between these different embodiments of life?
Yeah. Although I'm not sure that we always help the other people either.
No, if something is happening, in most situations, people are helping. If you definitely see that
Mm.
there are some health issues or something. But yes, unfortunately, we don't help each other as well.
Yes.
That's the problem. Yes. So thank you for this conversation. I think it is very thought-provoking, and each time I'm asking about this, what we might learn from this. And I think that our conversation is very enriching in learning and rethinking.
Let me give you one more example before we go. Um,
Mhm.
I recently, like I'm involved in water management and around the world and whatever, but it's all policy, it's all plans, institutional reform, all that high level stuff. I've recently joined the local environment group here in Portugal, in my local town, and we go out and measure the water quality every second Sunday, second or third weekend. We go out and we measure the quality of the river. In doing that, I've connected with the local river system here that I didn't have, and I've been living here for 10 years, and I didn't know, there's a river, very small creek runs down about 100 meters from where I am now. There's
Mhm.
otters in this creek. My favorite animal in the world. I didn't know that they walk past here, but we've seen signs of it in this creek, right? And so I feel so much more connected to this region now that I understand some of the animals and the birds that are here now and starting to learn a bit more about what native vegetation remains. But I'm one of maybe 30 people involved in this, and out of in this regional area, there's maybe 20,000 people.
Mhm.
And I would say that of that 20,000 people, 100 have a sense of connection with the nature and the wildlife in this area. That's a problem. I reckon
Mhm.
that's a problem. And if we could build more local connection, that will create local stewardship. And it's that whole thing of think globally, act locally. I think, that still has a lot of validity.
Definitely. Yes, definitely. Taking care of very small uh, land where you live. It's already a huge contribution to the whole rethinking of the system and
Yeah,
reevaluating of our impact, be it positive or negative, unfortunately.
yeah, yeah. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Marina. Been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. So I will send you the draft of the article based on our conversation. And I would also ask you, maybe if you, of course, if you have this opportunity, maybe you have some old photos of your visiting of this Broome city, or maybe your son has some photos of Derby or maybe some of this Kimberley area.
Hmm.
It would be great to use the pictures which are not from Google, but through your eyes, through your lens, what was interesting for you in this area? Again, be it nature or people, or maybe your fishing or something. So what is dear to you in this? It would be great.
I'll send you some. One of my mind goes straight to when we were fishing on that silent day, and this dragonfly came down and landed on the end of my fishing rod.
Oh, so beautiful. Yes.
Just beautiful. It's a really nice photo. I'll send you that and some others.
Yeah, please. It's fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much. It was so heartwarming conversation.
My pleasure. It is
I would like to visit Broome sometime.
Ah, you must. Don't go there on Easter weekend.
Okay.
But make sure you go into the Kimberley. Broome is not real Kimberley. Go into the Kimberley.
Yeah, that would be great. Now, I haven't been to Australia in my life, so yes, but I really understand that Sydney is not the only place which you need to visit in order to understand what the Australia is.
Yeah, I tell that to anyone that comes to Australia. Go to Sydney. It's a really interesting city, but go to the north of Australia. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank you.
See you later. Thanks.
Yeah, see you soon, and let's stay in touch.
Yeah, will
Thank
do.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye.